A Lothario's Legend. The Ballad of Chad Thundercock. Chapter 1. Jingle Jangle Jitters. Chad Thundercock surveyed his reflection in the infinity pool, his chiseled abs glistening in the Malibu sun. Life, as they say, was good. He had a killer beach house, a steady stream of beautiful women, and a career writing jingles that even toddlers could hum. Still, a persistent sense of unease nagged at him, like a catchy tune stuck on repeat but in a bad way. "Midlife crisis, dude," his brother, Sean, a perpetually stressed-out coder and recent divorcee, would say, shaking his head and adjusting his glasses. "It happens to the best of us." But Chad, in his infinite self-assuredness, scoffed at such notions. He was Chad Thundercock, the man who could charm his way out of a traffic ticket with a wink and a smile. A midlife crisis? Please. Yet, the universe, it seemed, had other plans. It started with a chance encounter at a swanky Hollywood party. There, amidst the flowing champagne and air kisses, stood Cynthia, an ex from his distant past. "Chad? Is that really you?" Cynthia gasped, her voice an octave higher than he remembered. He flashed her his trademark grin, the one that had launched 1,000 flings. "The one and only," he drawled, taking in her changes. Cynthia had traded her flowing blonde locks for a short, spiky cut. Her once feminine curves were now concealed beneath a shapeless suit. And her voice, well, it had definitely dropped a few octaves. "Cynthia? Is that you?" Chad stammered, momentarily thrown off his game. "It's Cyril now." She, or rather he, corrected. "I finally embraced my true self." Chad blinked, his brain struggling to process the situation. Had he slept with a woman who wanted to be a man? Or a man who was once a woman? Or, wait, did they both sleep with the same person? "This is going to make one hell of a chapter in my autobiography," Chad muttered under his breath, already envisioning the title. "My mom and I slept with the same dude." Needless to say, the reunion was short-lived. Cyril, still harboring a bit of resentment for their messy breakup, accused Chad of being emotionally unavailable and obsessed with lower body functions. Chad, stung by the unexpected truth bomb, retreated to his usual sanctuary, the piano. As his fingers danced across the ivory keys, he poured his confusion and angst into a soulful melody. "Why do women always complicate things?" he sighed, seeking solace in a bottle of tequila. His son, Ted, a 10-year-old with an uncanny ability to appear at the most awkward moments, wandered into the room. "Mom says you get in trouble 'cause you think with your little head," Ted chirped, completely oblivious to the weight of his words. Chad choked on his tequila, a mixture of amusement and mortification flooding through him. He knew he was no saint, but did everyone truly believe he was ruled by his instincts? Was there more to life than huffing, puffing, and blowing? Seeking a change of scenery and a distraction from his existential crisis, Chad decided to visit Sean and his son. The drive to Sean's modest house in the valley was a stark contrast to his usual glamorous outings. "So how's the single life treating you?" Chad asked, settling onto Sean's worn-out couch. Sean, looking more haggard than usual, ran a hand through his thinning hair. "Stacy's trying to turn me into a eunuch," he groaned, waving a court summons in Chad's face. "She wants full custody and a chunk of my anatomy." "Ouch." Chad winced, silently thanking his lucky stars he had never gotten hitched. Just then, the doorbell rang. Sean, muttering about alimony payments and frozen sperm, shuffled to the door. A moment later, he returned with a bewildered expression, followed by a woman who could only be described as a walking, talking midlife crisis. "Chad, this is Martha, Stacy's therapist," Sean said, his voice tight with forced politeness. Martha, a woman who appeared to have raided Joan Collins' wardrobe, fixed Chad with a predatory stare. "The infamous Chad Thundercock," she purred, her voice dripping with honey venom. "I've heard stories." Chad, never one to back down from a challenge, met her gaze with a playful smirk. "All true, I assure you," he said, his voice a husky murmur. The tension in the room was thicker than a bowl of Sean's homemade chili. It was clear that Martha had an agenda, and it probably involved turning Chad into the latest pawn in her twisted game of revenge against Stacy. "So how about we ditch the old fogies and go somewhere more private?" Martha purred, running a long, manicured nail down Chad's arm. Chad, despite himself, felt a flicker of interest. Maybe a little danger was just what he needed to shake things up. Besides, he was Chad Thundercock, the man who could tame even the most ferocious cougars. Chapter 2. Shepherds, Schemers, and Signs. The following day, Chad awoke with a pounding headache and a vague sense of dread. He had spent the night tangled in Martha's satin sheets, a whirlwind of dubious decisions fueled by cheap champagne and even cheaper therapy. As he stumbled out of bed, he noticed a note on the nightstand. It was from Martha, and it read simply, "Game on!" Chad groaned, his head throbbing in protest. He had a feeling he was in way over his head. To clear his mind, he decided to take a walk along the beach. The salty air and the sound of the waves usually had a calming effect on him. But this time, even the ocean breeze couldn't dispel the growing unease gnawing at his gut. As he strolled along the shoreline, deep in thought, he noticed a strange figure sitting on a nearby bench. It was an old man, dressed in an odd assortment of mismatched clothes. A thick, dusty book lay open on his lap. Chad, usually a magnet for beautiful women, found himself inexplicably drawn to the old man. He approached cautiously, his curiosity piqued. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" Chad said, trying to strike up a conversation. The old man looked up, his eyes twinkling with a strange intensity. "Indeed," he said, his voice raspy but surprisingly strong. "A perfect day for a journey." Chad raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Journey? Where to?" "To your personal legend, of course," the old man said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. Chad blinked, taken aback. What in the world was a personal legend? And why did this old man sound so familiar? "Personal legend? Sounds like something out of a cheesy self-help book," Chad scoffed, trying to mask his growing unease. The old man chuckled, a deep, rumbling sound that seemed to echo across the beach. "Ah, but it's far more profound than that, my boy," he said, his eyes boring into Chad's soul. "It's the reason you were brought into this world. It's the path the universe has laid out for you, marked by signs and omens." Chad, despite himself, felt a shiver run down his spine. The old man's words resonated with something deep within him, something he had long ignored. Could this be the answer to his restless spirit? Omens? Signs? Chad questioned, his skepticism warring with a burgeoning sense of wonder. "Like what?" The old man leaned closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Like meeting a king on a Malibu beach, for instance," he said, a mischievous glint in his eye. Chad's jaw dropped. How did this old man know? Had he been followed? Was this some kind of elaborate prank? "Who are you?" Chad demanded, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and fascination. "Melchizedek at your service," the old man said, bowing theatrically. "King of Salem and guide to those seeking their personal legends." Chad stared at him, utterly dumbfounded. A king? On a beach in Malibu? This had to be a joke. And yet, there was something about the old man's presence, his aura of ancient wisdom, that made Chad want to believe him. "Okay, let's say, for argument's sake, that I believe you," Chad said, choosing his words carefully. "What exactly does this personal legend involve? And what's in it for me?" Melchizedek smiled, his wrinkles deepening like ancient maps. "It involves a journey, my boy," he said, his voice filled with a strange excitement. "A journey to the pyramids of Egypt, where a hidden treasure awaits those who follow their destiny." Chad scoffed, shaking his head in disbelief. "Egypt? Are you serious? I haven't even been to Disneyland." "Think of it as an exotic vacation," Melchizedek coaxed, his eyes twinkling. "Think of all the veiled beauties you'll encounter in the desert. Think of the adventure, the mystery, the treasure." Chad's ears perked up at the mention of treasure and veiled beauties. Those were two things he definitely understood. And hey, maybe a change of scenery wouldn't be so bad. He was getting tired of the same old Malibu scene anyway. "All right, old man, you've piqued my interest," Chad said, a grudging admiration creeping into his voice. "What do I have to do?" "Simple," Melchizedek said, snapping his fingers. "Sell all your possessions, buy a flock of sheep, and follow the omens." Chad choked, his Malibu-tanned face turning a shade paler. "Sell everything? But I just bought a new jacuzzi." "Material possessions are merely distractions, my boy," Melchizedek said, waving a dismissive hand. "They weigh you down and keep you from fulfilling your true potential." Chad hesitated, torn between his love of luxury and the allure of adventure. He glanced at his reflection in the old man's book, barely recognizing the conflicted man staring back at him. He was Chad Thundercock, the Jingle King, the life of the party, the shepherd. "This is crazy," Chad muttered, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. "Life is a grand adventure, my boy," Melchizedek said, his voice filled with a strange conviction. "Don't let fear keep you from experiencing its wonders." And with that, the old man vanished, leaving Chad standing alone on the beach, a whirlwind of thoughts swirling in his head. He looked at his reflection once more, a new determination hardening his gaze. He was Chad Thundercock, and he was going to find his personal legend, even if it meant smelling like sheep for the next few months. Chapter 3. Crystal Visions and Jasmine Dreams. Selling his possessions proved easier than expected. Sean, eager to escape Stacy's wrath and her lawyer's legal maneuvering, readily agreed to buy Chad's car, a cherry-red convertible that had been the envy of every valet in Malibu. "Don't you dare scratch it," Chad warned, handing over the keys with a hint of reluctance. "I'll treat her better than Stacy ever treated me," Sean muttered under his breath, already plotting his escape route. With the proceeds from the car sale and a few other liquid assets, Chad purchased a flock of sheep from a bewildered farmer in the San Fernando Valley. "You sure you know what you're doing, son?" the farmer drawled, eyeing Chad's designer clothes with suspicion. "I'm a natural," Chad replied, flashing his winning smile. "Besides, I've always been good with ewes." The journey to Egypt proved more complicated. After a series of misadventures involving a misplaced passport, a tequila-fueled layover in Cancun, and a near arrest for indecent exposure on a nude beach in Ibiza, Chad found himself stranded in Tangier, a bustling port city on the northern coast of Morocco. Broke, disoriented, and desperately in need of a shower, Chad wandered aimlessly through the labyrinthine streets of the Medina. The sights, sounds, and smells of the exotic marketplace overwhelmed his senses. Men in jalabas haggled over spices, veiled women whispered secrets behind latticed windows, and the air was thick with the scent of incense and mint tea. "This is definitely not Malibu," Chad muttered, feeling a mixture of excitement and apprehension. He had never been anywhere so foreign. As he navigated the crowded souks, he came across a small, unassuming shop tucked away in a quiet corner. The sign above the door read, "Omar's Crystal Emporium." Intrigued, Chad stepped inside. The shop was a treasure trove of sparkling glassware, from delicate teacups to elaborate chandeliers. Behind the counter stood a man who could only be described as the antithesis of Chad Thundercock. He was short, stout, and wore a perpetually grumpy expression that could curdle milk. "Can I help you?" the man grumbled, eyeing Chad with suspicion. "Just browsing," Chad replied, his voice dripping with charm. "Beautiful crystal you have here," the man grunted, his expression softening slightly. "It's my life's work," he said, a hint of pride creeping into his voice. "My name is Omar." "Chad," Chad replied, extending his hand. "I'm a traveler." Omar eyed Chad's hand warily, as if it were a venomous snake. He hesitated for a moment before shaking it, his grip surprisingly strong. "What brings you to Tangier?" Omar asked, his voice still gruff but with a hint of curiosity. Chad, unsure how to explain his quest for a personal legend, simply shrugged. "I'm in between jobs." Omar nodded, seemingly understanding. "I'm looking for help," he said, his gaze lingering on Chad's well-maintained physique. "I need someone strong to move boxes and polish crystal." Chad winced. Polishing crystal? That didn't exactly scream adventure. But he was broke, desperate, and Omar's shop had a certain calming energy that appealed to him. "I'm your man," Chad said, trying to sound enthusiastic. "I've always been a meticulous cleaner." Omar grunted, his lips curving into a barely perceptible smile. "Good," he said. "You start tomorrow." As Chad worked alongside Omar, he discovered a hidden world of beauty and craftsmanship. He learned to appreciate the subtle nuances of light refracting through hand-cut crystal, the delicate biseance of form and function. "Beauty is the great seducer of men," Omar would say, his eyes twinkling with a mischievous glint. "It captures their attention, their hearts, their wallets." Chad, the master seducer, couldn't help but agree. He had always been drawn to beauty, whether in women, music, or the perfect sunset. But here, in Omar's shop, he began to see beauty in a new light, a reflection of something deeper, something more enduring. As the days turned into weeks, Chad settled into a routine. He woke before dawn, helped Omar open the shop, and spent the day polishing crystal, arranging displays, and chatting with customers. In the evenings, they would share a hookah and discuss life, love, and the pursuit of dreams. "I've always wanted to go to Mecca," Omar confessed one night, his voice filled with a wistful longing. "It's the dream of every Muslim, but I'm afraid to go. What if it doesn't live up to my expectations? What if it's just a disappointment?" Chad, surprised by Omar's vulnerability, found himself relating to the old man's fear. Was he also afraid of his treasure turning out to be a letdown? Was that why he had stalled in Tangier, content with polishing crystal and sipping mint tea? "Maybe it's better to keep Mecca as a dream," Omar continued, his eyes fixed on the glowing embers of the hookah. "A source of hope in this world of broken dreams." Chad nodded, a sense of understanding settling over him. He had chased countless dreams, most of them fleeting and superficial. Maybe Omar was right. Maybe some dreams were better left unrealized. But deep down, Chad knew he couldn't stay in Tangier forever. He had a personal legend to fulfill, a treasure to find. He had come too far to turn back now. Chapter 4. Desert Whispers and the Alchemist's Test. One evening, as Chad and Omar closed the shop, a caravan of camels laden with goods passed by their street. The sight stirred something within Chad, a longing for adventure, for the unknown. He remembered Melchizedek's words. "Follow the omens." "Where are they headed?" Chad asked, watching the caravan disappear into the twilight. "Across the Sahara, to the land of the pharaohs," Omar replied, his eyes filled with a distant longing. Chad's heart skipped a beat. Egypt. His treasure. "Do you think—" Chad began, but Omar cut him off. "Go, Chad," Omar said, his voice surprisingly firm. "Follow your personal legend. Don't let fear hold you back." Chad hesitated, torn between his newfound comfort in Tangier and the pull of his destiny. "But what about the shop?" Chad asked, a sense of loyalty tugging at him. "The shop will be fine," Omar said, placing a reassuring hand on Chad's shoulder. "I'll manage. Besides, I have a feeling you'll be back someday." And with that, Chad bid farewell to Omar and set off to join the caravan. The journey across the Sahara was unlike anything Chad had ever experienced. The vast, unforgiving landscape stretched before him, an endless expanse of sand dunes, rocky plateaus, and shimmering mirages. The days were scorching hot, the nights bitterly cold, and the silence was broken only by the wind howling through the dunes and the occasional groan of a camel. Chad, accustomed to the comforts of his Malibu lifestyle, found himself struggling to adapt. His skin burned, his lips chapped, and his hair, once his pride and joy, was constantly tangled with sand. Yet, amidst the hardship, Chad felt a strange sense of liberation. He was stripped bare, free from the distractions of his former life. He had nothing but the clothes on his back, his wits, and the burning desire to find his treasure. As the caravan journeyed deeper into the desert, Chad encountered a colorful cast of characters. Weathered camel drivers with tales of ancient mysteries, nomadic tribesmen with piercing gazes and enigmatic customs, and veiled women with eyes that seemed to hold the secrets of the desert. One evening, as the caravan rested beneath a canopy of stars, Chad found himself drawn to a particular camel driver, a man named Rashid. Rashid was unlike the other camel drivers, who were mostly gruff and taciturn. He had a gentle demeanor, a ready smile, and eyes that sparkled with an inner wisdom. Chad, seeking a break from the Englishman's incessant alchemical ramblings, approached Rashid and asked him about life in the desert. "The desert is a harsh mistress," Rashid said, his voice low and melodic. "But she also teaches valuable lessons. She teaches patience, resilience, and the importance of living in the present moment." "The present moment?" Chad questioned, his brow furrowed in confusion. "What do you mean?" Rashid smiled, his eyes twinkling in the firelight. "The past is gone, the future is uncertain," he said. "All we have is this moment, right here, right now. If you can learn to appreciate the present moment, you will find peace, happiness, and a deeper connection to the world around you." Chad, accustomed to living in the fast lane, found Rashid's words both intriguing and challenging. He had always been focused on the next conquest, the next thrill, the next anything but the present. "But how can you be happy when you're surrounded by danger and uncertainty?" Chad asked, gesturing to the vast, unforgiving desert. Rashid chuckled, a warm, rumbling sound. "Danger and uncertainty are part of life, my friend," he said. "They teach us to appreciate the good times and to be grateful for each breath we take. Besides, the desert is full of life if you know where to look." Rashid pointed to the sky, where a million stars twinkled like diamonds scattered across a black velvet cloth. "The stars are our constant companions," Rashid said. "They guide us through the darkness and remind us that we are part of something larger than ourselves." Chad, gazing up at the star-studded sky, felt a sense of awe wash over him. For the first time in his life, he felt truly connected to something beyond his own desires. He realized that there was more to life than chasing fleeting pleasures. There was meaning, purpose, and a beauty that transcended the physical realm. As the caravan continued its journey, Chad began to pay attention to the subtle signs and omens that Melchizedek had spoken of. He noticed the patterns in the sand dunes, the flight of the birds, and the whispers of the wind. He learned to read the language of the desert, a language that spoke to his soul. One night, as Chad lay awake in his tent, listening to the wind howl through the dunes, he experienced a vivid vision. He saw an army of fierce warriors approaching the oasis where the caravan was headed. The warriors were armed to the teeth, their faces contorted with rage, and their eyes burning with a thirst for blood. Chad sat bolt upright, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew he had to warn the tribal chieftains of the impending attack. But how? Would they even believe him? Chad sought out Rashid, his newfound mentor, and shared his vision. Rashid listened intently, his eyes filled with concern. "You must tell the chieftains," Rashid said, his voice firm but gentle. "It is your duty to warn them of the danger." Chad hesitated. He was just a jingle rider, not a warrior or a prophet. What if he was wrong? What if he made a fool of himself? "But what if they don't believe me?" Chad asked, his voice trembling with apprehension. "You must trust your intuition," Rashid said. "The desert whispers its secrets to those who listen." Emboldened by Rashid's words, Chad approached the tribal chieftains and told them of his vision. The chieftains, a group of hardened warriors, listened skeptically. "How do we know you're not a spy sent by our enemies?" One chieftain growled, his hand resting on the hilt of his scimitar. Chad, desperate to convince them, pleaded his case. He told them about his journey, his personal legend, and his desire to help others. Just when it seemed like all hope was lost, an old man, his face weathered and his eyes filled with ancient wisdom, stepped forward. The chieftains bowed their heads in respect. It was clear that this man held a position of great authority. "The stranger speaks with a truthful heart," the old man said, his voice low but resonant. "But his courage must be tested." Chad's heart sank. He had hoped to avoid any sword fights or other violent encounters. He was a lover, not a fighter. "Bring forth the warrior," the old man commanded. A hush fell over the camp as a tall, muscular warrior stepped forward. He was clad in black robes, his face concealed by a hood, and a sword strapped to his waist. His eyes, however, were visible, and they burned with a fierce intensity that sent shivers down Chad's spine. "Face the warrior," the old man said, his voice echoing across the camp. "If you survive, we will believe your words." Chad gulped, his throat suddenly dry. He had never been in a real fight before. He was a lover, not a... He drew a deep breath, remembering Rashid's words. "Trust your intuition." He closed his eyes and focused on the whispers of the desert, the language of the world. He felt a surge of energy flow through him, a sense of connection to something larger than himself. He opened his eyes, his fear replaced by a quiet determination. He faced the warrior, ready to meet his fate. Chapter 5. Love in the Time of Sandstorms. The warrior drew his sword, the polished steel glinting in the firelight. Chad, unarmed and unprepared, felt a surge of adrenaline course through him. He had to think fast. He raised his hands in a gesture of peace. "Wait!" he shouted. "I don't want to fight." The warrior paused, his sword hovering in the air. "Why not?" he growled, his voice deep and resonant. "Are you afraid?" "I'm not afraid of you," Chad replied, his voice surprisingly steady. "I'm afraid of failing to fulfill my personal legend." The warrior lowered his sword slightly, his eyes narrowing in curiosity. "What is your personal legend?" he asked. Chad hesitated, unsure whether to reveal his quest for the hidden treasure. He had learned to be cautious in the desert, where secrets were as valuable as water. "I'm searching for something," Chad said, choosing his words carefully. "Something that will give my life meaning." The warrior nodded, a flicker of understanding crossing his features. "We are all searching for meaning," he said. "But true meaning is found not in possessions, but in experiences, in connections, and in the pursuit of something greater than ourselves." He sheathed his sword, his movements fluid and graceful. "I am the alchemist," he said, removing his hood, revealing a face etched with wisdom and experience. "And I believe you are on the right path." Chad stared at the alchemist, astonishment washing over him. This fearsome warrior was the legendary alchemist he had been searching for? The man who held the secrets to transforming lead into gold and discovering the elixir of life? The chieftains, equally surprised, bowed their heads in respect. They had heard tales of the alchemist, a man who possessed great power and wisdom. His presence in their camp was a sign of favor from the gods. "Tell us of your vision, stranger," the oldest chieftain said, his voice filled with a newfound respect. Chad recounted his vision in detail, describing the approaching army and their thirst for blood. The chieftains listened intently, their faces grim. They knew that they were facing a formidable enemy, one that threatened their very existence. "We must prepare for war," the oldest chieftain declared, his voice ringing with authority. The camp erupted in a flurry of activity as the tribesmen prepared for the impending battle. Chad, despite his lack of military experience, found himself drawn into the preparations. He helped to fortify the camp, distribute weapons, and tend to the wounded. In the midst of the chaos, Chad noticed a young woman, her dark eyes shining with a mixture of fear and determination. She moved with a grace and agility that captivated him. He learned that her name was Fatima, and she was the daughter of the oldest chieftain. Chad, drawn to her beauty and spirit, found himself spending more and more time with Fatima. He told her stories of his life in Malibu, his quest for the hidden treasure, and his newfound appreciation for the desert. Fatima, in turn, shared stories of her life in the oasis, her connection to the desert, and her dreams for the future. She told him about the ancient legends passed down through generations, stories of love, loss, and the enduring power of the human spirit. As they spent time together, Chad found himself falling in love with Fatima. Her beauty, intelligence, and strength captivated him. For the first time in his life, he felt a connection that went beyond physical attraction. He felt a deep, soulful connection, a love that transcended language and culture. But their love was blossoming in the shadow of war. The threat of the approaching army loomed over them, casting a pall over their newfound happiness. Chad, torn between his love for Fatima and his desire to fulfill his personal legend, found himself facing a difficult choice. Chapter 6. The Language of the World. The battle came swiftly and brutally. The enemy army, a fierce tribe from the distant mountains, descended upon the oasis like a swarm of locusts. They were outnumbered, but their thirst for vengeance fueled their ferocity. Chad, despite his lack of combat experience, found himself fighting alongside the tribesmen, defending the oasis and the woman he loved. He discovered a hidden strength within himself, a courage he never knew he possessed. The battle raged for hours, the air filled with the clang of swords, the cries of the wounded, and the stench of blood and sand. Chad, his adrenaline pumping, fought with a desperate fury, his every move fueled by his love for Fatima. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the battlefield, the tide began to turn. The tribesmen, inspired by Chad's courage and their own determination, pushed back the enemy, forcing them to retreat into the desert. The victory was hard-won, and the oasis was left scarred by the violence. Many brave warriors had fallen, their blood staining the sand red. Chad, exhausted but exhilarated, searched frantically for Fatima. He found her tending to the wounded, her face pale, but her eyes shining with relief. He embraced her, holding her tightly, grateful that she was alive. "I thought I'd lost you," Chad whispered, his voice trembling with emotion. "I knew you would protect us," Fatima replied, her voice soft but firm. "You are a true warrior." Chad smiled, a warmth spreading through him that had nothing to do with the desert sun. He had faced his fears, fought for something he believed in, and emerged victorious. He was a changed man. But the war was not over. The enemy, though defeated, was still a threat. The chieftains gathered to discuss their next move. "We must pursue them into the desert," one chieftain declared. "We must crush them before they can regroup and attack again." Chad, listening to their plans, felt a sense of unease. He knew that the desert was a dangerous place, especially for those who were unfamiliar with its ways. He remembered Rashid's words. The desert tests all men. It challenges every step and kills those who become distracted. He approached the alchemist, who had remained silent during the chieftain's discussions. I must go with them, Chad said, his voice filled with a newfound determination. I must help them find the enemy. The alchemist nodded, his eyes twinkling with an unspoken understanding. The desert whispers its secrets to those who are willing to listen, he said. You have learned to hear its voice, Chad. Trust your intuition and follow your heart. Chad mounted his camel and rode out into the desert alongside the tribesmen. He left behind the woman he loved, but he carried her in his heart. He knew that his journey was far from over, but he was no longer afraid. He had found his courage, his purpose, and a love that would guide him through the darkest of nights. The desert stretched before him, vast and mysterious, a canvas upon which his personal legend would be written. The sun beat down upon him, the wind whipped at his face, and the sand shifted beneath his feet. But Chad rode on, his heart filled with a sense of adventure, and a deep knowing that he was exactly where he was meant to be.